The cafe's bell tinkled wearily as Maya pushed open the door, balanced precariously on one hinge. The worn brass jangled like a faint echo of past bustling mornings. Warm coffee scents mixed with the underlying tang of lemon polish drifted in the air, but no one sat at the chipped wooden tables or on the sagging stools by the counter. Maya inhaled slowly, trying to draw in courage from the familiar smell of home. The space felt haunted by the days when every seat was occupied, days when neighbors greeted each other with lively small talk and enveloped this small world in laughter and hope. That was before chain coffee shops moved in 2 streets over, before the neighborhood disputes over new developments put a dividing line between residents, before so many people lost their jobs and had to move away. Now, each day, Maya was lucky if half a dozen people trickled in for a cup of coffee. She stepped around an overturned crate of mismatched mugs, a testament to the ongoing attempts to reorganize and downsize. Although thoroughly disheartened, she refused to give up on her dream. Maya's parents had originally opened this cafe. They'd come to this neighborhood with almost nothing except her father's skill with pastry dough and her mother's gift for making everyone feel right at home. She grew up behind the counter, learning the subtle art of whisking cream into froth and comforting a sobbing teenager who got stood up on a date. In her mind, the cafe was more than a business. It was a place where hearts linked over a shared table. Somewhere along the way, though, the neighborhood had grown unfamiliar and distant. People kept to themselves. Old friends stopped waving when they passed on the street. Sorting through a stack of bills on the counter that evening, Maya felt her heart sink. The monthly rent, electricity, and water payments were higher than ever. Her bank account was scraping near the bottom. She sighed and poured herself a small mug of coffee, black and bitter, still warm from the recently cleaned pot. A wave of despair crashed over her. The thought of closing the cafe for good was painful, but she could see no other way. It was at that exact moment that the cafe's door squeaked open, causing Maya to startle and nearly drop her mug. In stepped Grace, an elderly woman who lived in a tiny apartment across the street. She wore a faded pink sweater over a floral skirt, her hooped earrings clinking, and her white hair curled immaculately. She was one of the few remaining regulars who still frequented the cafe. With her gentle, knowing eyes, she hobbled over to the counter and placed 2 knitting needles and a skein of soft yarn on it. "Busy?" Grace asked, her voice a comforting hush. "I wanted to work on your scarf. Weather's turning quite chilly, dear. I heard on the news tonight that we might see the first snow sooner than usual." Maya managed a thin smile, grateful for the distraction. "It's not busy at all, you know. You're welcome anytime. Coffee? Yes, please." Grace looked around the empty cafe. "Still quiet as a mouse den, I see." "Yes," Maya admitted softly. "I was just going over finances. It doesn't look good." Grace opened her arms as though wanting to draw Maya into an embrace. Instead, she laid a wrinkled hand over Maya's. "You're part of this community. You always have been. There's got to be a way to bring everyone back together, back to what truly matters." Her tone, though kind, carried an undercurrent of urgency. Maya let out a soft laugh. "I wish I knew how." Grace gave a kind, mischievous smile. "Well, people can't resist a good meal when it's offered genuinely. Nothing else unites folks like sharing food together." Maya nodded absent-mindedly, but her mind began to churn with ideas. Memories surfaced of her parents hosting free soup nights in the early years whenever the temperatures dropped. She had been just a child, clinging to the apron strings. She recalled the swirl of conversation, the hum of community, the collective warmth. And what if she revived it? Maya stared at Grace, eyes brightening. "Maybe that's exactly what I should do. Host a free soup night, maybe once a week. Just gather everyone in for good conversation, a warm meal, no pressure. The cafe might not be thriving financially, but perhaps the spirit of togetherness could be revived." Grace beamed, nodding so vigorously her earrings bounced. "You see, dear, that's how you gather hearts again." Bolstered by the spark of hope, Maya spent the next few days collecting recipes, rearranging the tables to accommodate big communal seating, and draping in warm lamps that gave the cafe a cozy glow. She pinned up a notice on the front door, the fresh paper smelling of printer ink, large letters proclaiming, "Free sup night all welcome." She also asked a few local shopkeepers to spread the word. Most responded with mild surprise, some gave a skeptical side eye, but most agreed to mention it to their customers. She told them the date and time, Friday night, just after dusk, at her cafe. Anyone could come, the hungry, the curious, the lonely. By the time Friday arrived, Maya had a pot of minestrone, a hearty lentil soup, and a creamy tomato bisque gently simmering on the stovetop in the kitchen. She'd spent the last of her grocery budget purchasing the best produce she could find at a nearby farmer's market, determined that if she was going to do this, she'd do it properly. The fresh basil in the tomato soup smelled like a garden in late summer, evoking comfort. She even managed to bake a few loaves of crusty bread early that morning. She stirred the soup and glanced nervously at the clock. Just 10 minutes before the official start time, her heart thrummed with a mixture of anticipation and fear. What if no one came? When the bell rang, Maya hurried behind the counter. The door swung open, letting in a gust of cold air and a group of 4 children ranging from 8 to perhaps 12 years old. They were siblings who lived a block away, alone with their mother who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. The oldest pressed her palm awkwardly against the door, trying to keep it open for her younger siblings. Maya's heart softened. Maya greeted them warmly, offering them seats at the large communal table in the center. The oldest asked softly, "It's really free?" "Yes, absolutely," Maya reassured. "Help yourselves. Would you like some bread too?" As the children shuffled closer to the steaming pots, their eyes brightened with comprehension that this was, indeed, a welcoming invitation. While Maya ladled soup into bowls, the door rang out again. Grace appeared, followed by an older man wearing a threadbare dark coat. He looked unsure but stepped inside after some gentle encouragement from Grace. Maya recognized the man from around the neighborhood. His name was Edgar, a retired factory worker who'd had to sell his house a few years back. Lately, he'd taken to living alone in a small room in a rundown complex. The rumor was that he no longer kept a stove. Warm food was a luxury. He eyed the soups warily at first, but then lowered himself onto a stool as Maya coaxed him to try a bowl of minestrone. From there, word seemed to travel like a wave rippling outward. More people filtered in, single mothers with tired eyes, an elderly couple in search of conversation, a few out-of-work laborers who had lost their construction jobs, even a teenage girl with blue streaks in her hair who always seemed to keep to herself slipped in quietly. Some neighbors that Maya barely knew also wandered inside, each drawn by the promise of warm soup and genial company. The cafe grew busier than it had been in a long time. The hush of a once empty space gave way to chatter and laughter. Spoons clinked against bowls. Exclamations of delight filled the air. At the large table, children giggled over the tomato soup's bright red color while seniors swapped stories of back in my day. Maya felt a tightness in her chest release as she realized that this, finally, was the cafe's heartbeat returning. At the end of the night, when the last droplets of soup were scraped from the pot and the bread baskets were empty, Maya stood by the door to say goodnight to each visitor. People lingered, smiling, reluctant to leave the warm glow behind. They spoke in hushed tones about next time, about how relieved they were to see a gathering that reminded them of the neighborhood's old sense of togetherness. Grace patted Maya's arm. "This was beautiful. I haven't laughed this much in ages." That was just the spark we all needed. Even Edgar murmured a low, grateful thank you before he stepped outside carefully, cradling his coat around him. The children left too, carrying an extra loaf of bread for their mother. When the door finally fell shut, its bell echoing softly behind them, Maya discovered tears had pooled in the corners of her eyes. She wiped them away, but they were tears of gratitude and a renewed sense of hope. Maybe the cafe could survive in spirit, if not in profit. She decided to hold soup night every Friday. The second week, more folks showed up, a couple who hadn't spoken to each other in months. Neighbors who had argued over a fence line found themselves bumping chairs at the communal table. Initially, there was an icy silence, but as they sipped soup and discovered their mutual love of hearty lentil stew, the tension thawed. Little by little, conversation flowed and they ended up working through their differences. Maya watched, relieved. She was seeing the fractured edges of this community tentatively stitching themselves back together. There was also a group of volunteers from the local church who showed up, having heard the rumor that Maya was single handedly feeding the hungry. They offered to bring extra bread and help serve next time. One of them, a passionate choir teacher named Leah, had enough vocal presence to be heard even over the bustle of conversation. She bounced with enthusiasm, brainstorming ways to make future soup nights even more special, like adding live music or a reading corner for kids. Maya was heartened by the help. It had become clear after the first soup night that if she was to keep this going, she'd need a lot more hands and more groceries. To her surprise, the volunteers delivered. People arrived with extra ingredients, donated vegetables, day-old bread from a bakery that would have otherwise gone to waste, even large donations of chicken broth cartons from a local grocer who wanted to help. Excitement gradually replaced Maya's worry. The cafe was no longer merely hers to operate. It was becoming a community effort, a joint project to ensure no one in the neighborhood went cold and hungry. Just as the nights got darker earlier and the air crisper, soup night became the gift everyone looked forward to. A sense of anticipation hovered in the streets, an almost festive air every Friday night. Candles on the tables lit the cafe with a gentle glow, and even though Maya could not pay all her bills on time every month, she found hope. Both new and familiar faces came streaming in like a tide, and the intangible bonds that formed over the shared meal began to ripple into the neighborhood outside. Weeks turned into months. The joys spread beyond the cafe. Edgar, who rarely spoke, was heard telling jokes to a group of fascinated children. He might have been quiet, but the grin on his face each evening said more than words ever could. The children from across the street started hanging out after school at the cafe, practicing their homework at the tables, munching on leftover bread. When the teenage girl with the blue streaks in her hair, her name turned out to be Marisol, got into an argument at home, she found a haven at the cafe. Confiding in Maya as though she were a kindly aunt, Marisol's eyes brimmed with tears, and Maya offered her not just soup, but a safe place to talk, a reassurance that she mattered. One chilly Thursday afternoon, just before the cafe closed for the day, Maya received a harsh reminder of reality. A thick envelope arrived in the mail, stamped with the property owner's name. Inside was a notice. Her rent was going up. If she did the math, this rent increase would make it virtually impossible to keep any normal paid operations afloat, in addition to hosting free soup nights. Despite the outpouring of neighborly support, the cafe's sales on regular days hadn't improved significantly. People still struggled with their own finances. Maya feared she might have to shut down permanently. Her hands felt clammy as she folded the letter back into the envelope. She shut her eyes for a moment, leaning against the kitchen countertop. Was there no way to continue? By the time she opened her eyes, Grace stood in the doorway to the kitchen, her gaze soft but piercing. She must have come through the front, letting the bell chime gently. "Trouble, dear?" she asked, noticing the dread in Maya's expression. Maya offered her the letter, letting her read it in silence. The wrinkles on Grace's brow deepened. She finally set it on the counter and joined Maya in a seat at the small wooden table. "This is dreadful," she said steadily. "But shutting down? That's unthinkable." Maya felt tears burning in the corners of her eyes again. She forced a shuddering breath. "I don't see a way out. The rent was already high. They want more now, and I can't afford it." Grace leaned in, folding Maya's hands in her own. "Don't lose hope. Let's talk to the community. Perhaps we can plan something." Maya's first reaction was to balk, because asking for help always weighed on her pride. But she caught herself, recalling that the cafe no longer existed only for her. It was for all of them. She realized that it might be time to lean into that truth. She nodded. That Friday, more people than ever arrived, proof of how deeply soup night had planted itself in the neighborhood's routine. After the bowls and spoons had done considerable clinking, and the day's supply of warm bread had vanished, Maya cleared her throat to address the crowd. The patrons quieted, spoons lingering midair, eyes turning to her. She glanced around and swallowed her nerves. "I want to thank you all for keeping soup night alive," she began, voice trembling with emotion. This cafe belongs to all of us. Unfortunately, I might have to close it soon. The rent is increasing, and I just can't cover it. Gasp passed through the room. Grace, seated in the corner with her knitting, looked around and nodded solemnly. Some folks wore heartbreak on their faces, others appeared shocked. Maya wasn't sure if she'd find words to say more, but she forced herself to continue. I can't handle this alone. If you have ideas or the means to help, I'm happy to talk. If not, I understand. But I hope we can find a way to keep these soup nights and this sense of community alive. Silence hovered, broken only by the sound of a ladle knocking against a pot. Then Leah from the church choir spoke. What if we did a fundraiser? She proposed, her eyes flickering with that spark of determination. A neighborhood fundraiser to show the landlord that this cafe means something. We could have live music, a bake sale. There are so many ways. You can't just close. Others began chiming in. Everyone had ideas, a neighborhood yard sale whose proceeds would go toward closing the rent gap, a raffle, perhaps an art show featuring the youth in the area. A hush fell again as if they needed to measure the magnitude of the moment. Then, one by one, folks nodded. They would do it. Together. Together, the next week was a flurry of enthusiastic activity. Families volunteered to bake goods. Youth groups offered to create flyers and post them around the neighborhood. An older man who used to be a professional musician said he'd gather friends to play a small jazz gig in the cafe one evening and charge a modest entry fee. The church choir offered to sing carols given the holiday season was in the air. Even passers-by who glimpsed the excitement through the windows began stepping in, asking how they could pitch in. The neighborhood seemed to awaken from its slumber. People who had never attended soup night were drawn in by the sense of unity and care. Kids wove flyers through mail slots and taped them to lampposts, announcing community fundraiser, Save Our Cafe. The energy crackled in the air like a bright spark of electricity. On the day of the fundraiser, a soft blanket of snow drifted down from a steel-colored sky. Maya woke early, anxious and hopeful in equal parts. To warm the cafe for the visitors, she strung twinkle lights in the windows and lined the inside with tables of homemade goods pies, cookies, brownies, crocheted ornaments, greeting cards. All were donated. A large sign, handcrafted by one of the teenage volunteers, read, "Donations appreciated. Help keep soup night alive." The band arrived, instruments in tow, stamping their boots free of snow by the doorway. Leah, loud and bright, led a group in, caroling on the street, beckoning folks inside. Within an hour, the space overflowed with neighbors, swirling with laughter and conversation. People who had once been on opposite sides of neighborhood disputes now rubbed shoulders amicably, sipping on the special wish soup Maya had made just for the occasion. Colorful crocheted scarves and hats from Grace lined a small display in the corner, with each piece labeled "Pay What You Can." As the day wore on, Maya drifted around the cafe, stunned. The donation jar perched by the counter kept filling with bills, loose change, even checks. Children proudly thrust coins forward, and older folks quietly slipped in folded bills. One man, whose face Maya only vaguely recognized, placed an envelope in the jar that was obviously thicker than most, quietly murmuring his support. Every time someone contributed, Maya felt more of her tension release. By evening, the band struck up a jazzy rendition of winter tunes, and the cafe was nearly bursting with patrons. Indeed, it was the busiest day the cafe had seen in ages. Buzzier than any day in her parents' era, as far as Maya could recall. It felt as if the entire patchwork of the neighborhood had convened under one roof, and all because they believed in this cafe's power to bind them together. Eventually, the night began to wind down. Grace, exhausted from greeting people, patted Maya's hand and nodded toward the donations. "Why don't you see what the total is?" she urged gently. "We're all waiting with bated breath." Maya's stomach flipped nervously. She removed the overflowing donation jar carefully. With trembling hands, she tallied the money on the front counter while the last few stragglers watched. An excited hush fell. It took several minutes to sort through all the bills, coins, and checks. But as she came to the final tally, tears brimmed in her eyes. The total easily covered not just the rent increase, but the next month's rent too, with some left over to keep soup night going strong. She read the number out loud. A round of applause thundered around her. Someone whistled. Others laughed with relieved tears shining in their eyes. Grace pressed a trembling hand to her chest, murmuring thanks. Leah hopped with joy, hugging anyone within reach. Maya simply stood, speechless, as an immense wave of gratitude and wonder washed over her. This was more than a fundraiser success. This was the neighborhood uniting with purpose, refusing to let one of their shared communal spaces die. It was kindness in tangible form. As people prepared to leave, the snow still dusted the sidewalk outside under the glow from the street lamps. Maya could see footprints weaving in and out of the small patch of ground by the door, evidence of the traffic that day. She opened the door to bid them farewell, the cold wind whipping her hair. One by one, neighbors gave short waves, smiles, and last thank yous. The leftover soup had been shared freely, and people carried home goodies purchased or donated from the fundraiser. Before they parted, many of them promised they would be back next Friday for soup night. "Don't close," said the oldest of the four siblings, hugging Maya's side awkwardly. "Please. It's homey here." Maya stooped to meet the girl's gaze. The child had wide, earnest eyes that reminded Maya of her own reflection many years ago. "I promise," Maya said, her voice catching. "We'll keep the doors open." She watched them file out into the snow, their small footprints etched side by side in the powder, conversation floating up through the chilly air. Maya's heart felt light as a feather, buoyed by the community's powerful message. Not long after, with the door locked behind her and the cafe empty save for herself, Maya gently lit a small candle on the counter, a gesture of gratitude for what she had been given. The flame danced and flickered. She had worried about paying rent, about keeping the cafe afloat, about preserving her parents' legacy. In that moment, however, she understood with a clarity she had never felt before. The cafe was the people. As long as these shared bonds existed, the warmth would live on, no matter the season or the complications life brought. Maya gazed at the pictures on the wall, a framed snapshot of her parents on opening day, smiling in front of the brand new cafe sign. Now, albeit aged, that sign still hung above the door, but it felt reborn. Through soup night, it had rekindled in people's hearts what her parents first envisioned, a space where differences melted away, replaced by empathy, kindness, and the immeasurable magic of neighbors sharing a meal. Tucking away the donations and ensuring everything was secure for the night, Maya took one final, lingering look at the cafe. She let the warmth of the day's event settle in her bones. Tomorrow, she'd deposit the money and finalize arrangements to meet the new rent. The future felt substantially brighter compared to those dark evenings staring at ominous stacks of bills. She turned off the main lights, leaving just a soft lamp glowing near the tables where hours earlier neighbors had chatted like old friends. A sense of contentment swathed Maya's heart. She knew that the real magic of soup night was never just about soup. It was about offering warmth when things grew cold, about opening doors when hearts were so often closed. It was proof that generosity, once sparked, grew steadily like a cozy flame in winter. Maya echoed a silent thanks to the many hands that built this miracle. From Grace's unwavering faith and knitting needles to Leia's exuberant choir and the teen volunteers armed with flyers and raw determination, to the quiet generosity of a neighborhood that might have been fractured but was still capable of unity. All their hopes and dreams, wrapped in ladles of soup and servings of bread, had knit together into something far greater than she ever could have imagined on her own. Blowing out the single candle on the counter, she was left standing in the hush of the cafe, that place of possibility. She felt the promise in the darkness. Yes, tomorrow would bring a new day and with it new challenges. But every Friday it would also bring soup night and a chance for renewal, proof that even the smallest pot of soup and the simplest loaf of bread could spark enduring bonds among a community hungry not just for food but for connection and hope.